asked to reflect on our actions beyond Paris, and particularly from the perspective of an action plan. I hope most of you must have been already familiar with what has been happening, because we have already our NDCs clear and have been releasing our progress through the economic survey reports. So this is nothing, something like a quite new thing, but rather a kind of reflection of what has been there, just for our collective appreciation. Next. So in the course of the presentation, I will be just touching upon the key trajectories and our NDCs and our long-term carbon development policy and its achievements. Next. So this is a core philosophy, perhaps. We recognize that climate change is not fought in silos. This is an evident case when it comes to the realization of our SDGs also. Though climate change is just an SDG at SDG number 13, every action taken in climate change is complementing the sustainable development goals in one way or other. So not only from that perspective alone, but otherwise also, it's a cross-sectoral engagement which calls for collaborative action between different development sectors and also between different agencies and all walks of society. Putting it simple, it's like all of society and all of government engagement which calls for climate action. So that's in a nutshell of our philosophy of engagement. And next slide. Next slide. Sorry. This is about the key reflections as we discuss our development trajectory. We should also appreciate the context in which we have initiated and have been following these actions. Yes, we are one of the fastest developing economies with almost 1/6 of the humanity here, and we are aiming to become urbanized in a major way by 2040 and other targets at 2070. And what is more important is our growth momentum is integral to the growth of the world as such, and also to realize the 2030 Sustainable Development Goals. Without this 1.4 billion people reaching that target, maybe world will have a deficit. And so our role is very crucial and very fundamental to realize these development tracks. And yes, of course, our path forward has challenges. And it has areas of confrontation with respect to resource availabilities and also to the philosophies followed, perhaps, when it is contrasted with the philosophies other countries follow. But then the bottom line is that our contribution to climate change has been minimal. This is a universal fact. Still, we are blamed for taking less action, but it's not that way founded well. Next. So the key trajectory which we have been tracking is that we are fundamental in our argument that India is strongly committed to combat climate change and making development choices that ensure our growth and development along a low carbon pathway towards net zero by 2070. This is the established trajectory we have set for ourselves. But at the same time, we also argue and recognize that climate change is a global collective action problem. And where the firm adherence to multilateralism in terms of technology transfer, collective action, and resource sub-provisioning are very fundamental to realize these positions. And the very fundamental of principle of common but differentiated responsibility and respective capabilities will always guide the actions as well. That's the fundamental philosophy which have been guiding our actions. Now, coming to limiting the global cumulative emissions within the global carbon budget is obviously the key aspect, which is in fact the critical thing, which all of us across the world are striving to achieve to keep the temperature below 1 degree or max 1.5 degree. And India maintains that operationalizing this target will have to be based on equity and climate justice. Similar is a concern which I already mentioned about the common but differentiated responsibilities and also the historical context in which these challenges have come forward. So this leaves a pressure on development goals, but however, these have to be addressed and have been factored in our nationally determined contributions in the context of national circumstances, and while utilizing the space of development in terms of carbon space that's available. Now, we have already given our communications to the NDC, to the UNFCCC as nationally determined contributions, which all seeks to enhance our um, achievements and also our aspirations under the Paris Agreement. So which essentially hovers around a few key points, which is like reducing emission density of GDP by 45% by 2030 from 2025 level, and achieving 50% cumulative electric power from non-fossil fuels by 2030, and achieving our long-term target of reaching carbon neutral by 2070, and of course all complemented by the massive engagement and call for behavioral changes in our relations with the resource utilization through mission life, which is a non-committed but a behavioral call for action, which is there in the national determined contribution. So in our specific third national communication, which we submitted to the UNFCCC, we have committed that all those three major points which I just mentioned. At the same time, what we have to appreciate here is that 78%, nearly 75% of our emissions in our country comes from the anthropogenic side, and that too from the energy sector. And when we divide it further, nearly 13.44% is from agriculture sector, and 8.4% is from industrial side, and the land use side, including, I mean to say very precisely, like 2.34% is from the waste generated in the country. And of course, the land use sector also acted as a sink. So we have certain challenges, at the same time, certain potentials also, like our land use sector, particularly represented by the forest wealth we have. It's an incredible sink which we have and have to be protected, conserved, and fostered for saving our carbon space, which is available for development. Now let's look at the development policy, which is guiding us to take us forward in this space. Is our low carbon development policy, which is also a document which is quite available, but just here to reflect with all of us. And for 4.19 of the Paris Agreement, this is a document which gives our long-term low greenhouse gas emission development strategy. And it is simply based on the very fundamental principle of common but differential responsibilities and respective capabilities. And that too in the specific context of our country. And this has a mission mode approach. As already we know, we started the climate missions in 2008 with 8 missions, and now it has been expanded. And our National Action Plan on Climate Change outlines multiple strategies across the sectors like solar energy, water, waste, forests, sustainable habitat, and so on. And these action plans, the action areas, are converted into state-level action plans, which are called state-level action plans on climate change. And as of now, 34 states have their own action plans, which are periodically revised also, and then implemented with the help of various central and state sector resource assistance. And when it comes to our historical contribution, as we have been always saying that it has been quite negligible. Of course, our per capita is also quite negligible, but then we are blamed for being the third largest emitter. But of course, that's a part of the development trajectory, which we have to force and forge in the context of our developmental priorities. At the same time, developing countries also need to take their own actions to become carbon neutral or net zero by 2050. And that requires a lot of investments in key sectors driving climate emissions, like in energy, transport, and so on. And obviously, this calls for resource investments and collaborative technology transfers, which are like areas still to really get certified. And as you all know, we have just heard about how energy is at the center of all the climate strategies. So is the case with our country as well. There is a strong case of raising our development, energy development deficit, and which is to be again put into the annual tract of 28.7 gigajoules of requirement, which calls for additional creation at the same time trying to become on the lesser emissions side. So these are the key challenges in the area. However, with these challenges forging and we have a powerhouse for a clean energy producing landscape with a leader, being a leader in energy transition from carbon dioxide producing sources to renewable and non-fossil fuel sources, which is a clear story which all of us share and appreciate. And renewable capacity has risen, and we have become the fourth largest in the world, and the capacity expansion is also has been taking a considerable pace. And we have the ambitious target of reaching 450 gigawatts by 2030 as well. Now, when it comes to low carbon strategies for development, as per our national circumstances, the mitigation efforts are not just driven by climate-specific policies, but also by broader development choices, a fact which was narrated and shared already. At the same time, shifting to low-carbon development pathways, including access to different developmental resources like energy, security, all those key considerations are also sector-bound. However, we are not going to be bound with a sector-based mitigation approaches, because that maybe that will be rather at the kind of like a factoring in with the overall development matrix which we are pursuing. Now, coming to low carbon strategies for development, as per our national circumstances, we have the global and domestic context before us, which calls for equity and need for sustainable development. At the same time, we have the resources as well. So there are diverging arguments about it. But then perhaps the established position of the country is that we'll factor in the existing resources based on the national priorities and move forward while trying to be as close to the zero emission strategies which we can achieve. Now, towards building climate resilience, this is further a key area where perhaps our country needs an urgent action, because much of our landscapes are supporting most of the population. For if you take the case of commons, nearly 400 million people are dependent on the commons for their livelihood or for their food or medicine or for their occasions. But these commons are increasingly getting affected by the impacts of climate change, driving their resilience to down, or maybe their quality of ecosystem services and products generated by them falling. So these are like concerns which definitely calls for an increased investment or attention on building resilience. So keeping all these things, we have the long-term development strategy, which is also a released document, which speaks about low carbon development for different sectors. Starting from the energy system, we have aligned the energy, electricity development, resource protections in consistency with the development, and forwards for integrated, efficient, and inclusive low carbon transport system, and adoption of climate-friendly planning and bylaws in urban landscapes, and decoupling growth from emissions and emissions from the different sectors in the economy, and so on. Now, coming to the energy again, refocusing it to the context, aiming a 40% electricity production in India from non-fuel sources by 2030 is the challenge, and perhaps we are very much closer to that, and we will be achieving it as well. And we have the results already before us. And this clean energy production goes hand in hand with the parallel efforts to reduce emission intensity of our economy by 30 to 35 percentage from 25 levels by 2030 itself. And key schemes of the government like Ujala and LED lamps and all, they're like driving this change in the field. For instance, the simple LED lamp scheme itself is reducing carbon dioxide emissions by 38.5 million tons every year, which is incredible. These are like some reflections of the actions happening in the field, but then when we put the things together, definitely the trajectory is quite delivering and is helping us to reach our commitments and goals. And now to summarize what we have achieved. We have successfully reduced our emission intensity of the GDP by 33 percentage between 2005 and 2019, which is an NDC target itself for achievement, and we did it before like 11 years ahead of the scheduled time. And also achieved 40 percentage of the electricity installed capacity through non-fossil fuel source. Just a point we just highlighted. And that too 9 years ahead of our target. And between 2017 and 23, we added nearly 100 gigawatts of installed electricity capacity, and of which 80% is from the non-fossil fuel based resources. And additional to that, we have been forging with other countries in our climate leadership for collective actions, and our setting up of International Solar Alliance, the Coalition for Disaster Resilience Infrastructure. These are like incredible global engagements which our country has been pursuing. And similar is the actions in the other sides, other spaces of the landscape, like we take Big Cat Alliance, which focuses the Big Cat countries for a collaborative action in ecosystem protection and support to the communities. So in sum, we can say most of the target of the first NDC were achieved well in advance. However, as we progress towards the rest of the years, we are in a track to realize the rest of the commitments as well. Of course, there are challenges with it. As I mentioned, there are challenges with respect to collaboration, technology transfer, additional resources required, and so on. Again, this is a focus on transport network, as we did in the case of energy. And of course, the people sitting here are quite expert in their own domains, and most of them must be connected to energy, transport, and such similar sectors. So there is nothing new, but just to reflect the same thing, that our next generation infrastructures are mostly focusing on mass transit systems and green highways and waterways, which are like quite less emission intensive, at the same time contributing to the nature-based economies in some sense as well, along with the basic infrastructure creation. And the National Electricity Mobility Plan is yet another dimension, which is aiming to have 30% of our vehicles from the electricity, like electric vehicle side. So in summary, I would like to say that we have achieved most of our pre-2020 voluntary contribution commitments. Our policies and actions have been acknowledged to be compatible with the 2-degree centigrade warming target max of the agreement. And we have been consistently making ambitious commitments, which was also like reflected in the Honorable Prime Minister's speech in Glasgow. And we accordingly have updated the NDCs as per the requirement of Paris Convention as well, or at every 5 years. And now our targets are very clear. 2070, we have a net zero target, and meeting 50% of our cumulative electric power from non-fossil fuels by 2030, reducing emission intensity of economy by 45% by 2030 compared to 2005 style levels, and then the mission life, which is our engagement lever for collective action through behavioral change in consumption and responding to climate change. In some conclusion, I'd like to say that as we are committed in Paris Convention agreement, Our commitments have been translated into action, and we have been yielding the results and marching ahead. However, we need to emphasize, as I have been mentioning across the interaction, that international cooperation is very much pivotal to support developing economies in achieving most of the developmental goals, that in the context of climate change, from the mitigation side as well as from the adaptation side. And this will have to be in the spaces of finance, technology, as well as in fostering collaborations for joint actions. And of course, India's climate goals can be fully realized only if the financial assistance for low carbon technology transfer and capacity building are met under the UNFCCC. This is one of the established caveats in this. And India can't deploy low carbon climate strategies at a significant scale unless facilitating global technology regime is also in place, perhaps with the coming up COPs and the other multilateral engagements with the involvement of stakeholders. Maybe this will be a reality in the times to come. And that only perhaps will change the scenario phenomenally, the way and the scale and the speed at which we would like to achieve our climate goals. And obviously, the argument still stands. The developed nations must take the lead, not only in emission reductions, but also in developing international climate finance and technology arrangements to respond to this challenge. Of course, the Paris Convention and the COPs subsequent to that have chalked out the strategies and framed operational guidelines and so on, but still the traction is to be picked up. And perhaps in the coming COPs, the things will be much more streamlined and frameworks will be very robust to deliver the required support to the developing countries. Going beyond the commitments, we have already mentioned how we escalated our commitment levels from different NDC to NDCs. As a responsible global citizen, we have been active in our space and we have been taking the global leadership as has been established through the, as has been evidenced through the statements of our Honorable Prime Minister. And as I just mentioned, we have the International Solar Alliance, our flagship collaboration and coalition platforms. And more than 80 countries are now partners in this Solar Alliance, and making it one of the fastest growing international bodies. That shows our incredible leadership in this dimension. And of course, through this combination of national action and responsible leadership which our country has been displaying, we occupy a unique position amongst the developing countries in fighting this global challenge for us and for the rest of the world. And we are a leader in thought and action on climate change, which is in a case established. And as a summary, I would like to quote that in the domain of climate action, every ounce of our practice is worth more than the ton of preaching. This is a clear case when it comes to mission life or in other engagements at climate action for mitigation or adaptation at local, regional, or national level. We are taking practical steps all across the areas, including energy, industry, transport, agriculture, and protection of green spaces in all of society journey to become a leader in climate action and climate ambition. This has been quite reflected as we just saw over the slides, how the country has factored in different spaces of development, considering its own potentials and challenges and aspirations, whilst sticking to the expectations of Paris Conventions and going beyond in several occasions. Now, I'd like to further state that climate action perhaps is not a platform which is just ending at national level. It needs to be taken down to subnational, I mean to say state level, and also to the local level. For instance, to the audience, I'd like to share how the state of Arunachal Pradesh has shown the country a path forward by going for its own climate declaration. Arunachal Pradesh is a state with nearly 72% of its geographic area under forest and natural resources, and inhabited by nearly 13 lakhs plus indigenous species, indigenous tribals. However, the state has been quite vulnerable for climate change owing to its predisposition in the Himalayas and also to the strong dependence of the communities to natural resources. So the state in the year 2021 took a historic decision to go for a state level climate change declaration, and in which the cabinet for the first time ever in the history of the state had a full day cabinet meeting deliberating on climate change in a tiger reserve called Parket Tiger Reserve, just to highlight how natural resources are important for the state, and adopted a 75 point based engagement for climate action. So this all declaration is called a Packet Declaration, and it has laid out different institutional arrangements at state level, district level, and local level for community action or collaborative action. So the point why I'm saying is that, of course, we have the national policies and actions in place. At the same time, what we need is actions going at sub-regional, national, state level, and local level. And then that too with the collaboration of potential stakeholders and actors, including private sector, the NGOs, the civil society organizations, and local self-guidance, so that we can shape up credible climate actions in terms of local adaptation plans, large-scale or medium-scale mitigation plans, and then effectively converge our resources to deliver clear climate outcomes for the communities, for their sustainability. At the same time, delivering the expectations of the Sustainable Development Goals, because climate action, though, as I mentioned at the very beginning, though it's one of the SDG goals, at goal number 13, every action we take in climate side is a complementary action to the SDG. So it is a kind of a great deal of synergy space where climate action can also push actions towards a sustainable development goals. With that, I'd like to thank each one of you for your kind patient listening. There was nothing new in what I shared. It was a quick presentation which I had to shape up. Of course, it's all stated stuff which is available for your reading in the platforms, and the references are also here. So kindly go through this, and thank you so much.